My dad told me to never pop the hoods of our cars. Now I know why. This was a rule as far back as I can remember. I always just assumed it was some sort of thing about keeping me safe, so I don't pinch my fingers or burn myself somehow. I didn't really become curious until I started driving my own hand-me-down at 15. Whenever I turned the key in the ignition, I heard laborious wheezing briefly before a low humming and a grunt. When I put it in drive and pressed down on the gas pedal, the car would begin to moan as wet tearing and mechanical snapping resonated loudly. It wasn't until I rode in friends' cars that I realized engines don't breathe like mine did. At that point, I only ever really rode in my parents' cars and my own when I practiced driving. When I asked my dad about it, he was livid. I thought it was just a mundane question, but his face turned beet red and he told me to never speak on it again. To drop the subject, I thought for a second that he would slap me across the face. Needless to say, I kept on driving without popping the hood, scared of the consequences. But I couldn't help but feel curious when I heard faint knocking sounds. Sometimes the AC sounded like it was slowly dragging air back into itself, ragged like a malfunctioning part. My friends would comment on it. They thought my car was broken. Some found it creepy. They didn't ask me to drive them around much. Help me help. I heard it at a stoplight one morning while driving to school. It was faint, so quiet I almost couldn't hear it at all. But it's what pushed me over the edge. As soon as I parked, I pulled the lever under the seat and heard for the first time the pop of the hood. I got out and squeezed my fingers under the metal, preparing for whatever may lie under. I looked around briefly to make sure no one was near and I began to lift up. As soon as I started to lift the hood, I heard a loud peeling sound and a cry. My stomach turned and I continued my effort. I ignored the sound and jerked it up the rest of the way with a sick tear. The sight sent me reeling with nausea. A man, no, more like pieces of a man, was scattered throughout a disgusting, bloody amalgamation of flesh and veins and unrecognizable bones. Long fingers jutted out randomly, moving spastically, blood under their worn nails. A single, fleshy, pink, exposed lung expanded and contracted with terrible, ragged breaths. Metal tubes and wires and gears interrupted the mass, ripping through the flesh, leaving charred skin in places, and intersecting at odd angles. Then I saw the face. It was stretched out, close to ripping apart. 2 eyeballs were stuck open, bloodshot red, with black soot tears staining the skin around them. The nose was more like 2 open cavities that mucus bubbled from. The mouth was stretched open like the eyes, and the inside was stained black along jagged and broken teeth. It began to scream something awful. My grip slipped as I fell to my knees. The hood slammed shut and I couldn't stop myself from heaving up my breakfast onto the pavement. My world was spinning. That I went about my day without really being able to focus on much. The sight of the car had me shaken to my core. I was terrified when school let out. I'd have to drive home. I sat inside the car, my fingers tingling as they held the key right at the ignition. When I gathered the courage finally, I turned the key and I was met with the familiar grunt and wheeze, followed by bones snapping and flesh rendering as I drove it home. Oil. I need oil. The death rattle beckoned from the AC vent. I tried to ignore it the best I could. Please, God, please. It was too much. I raced the rest of the way home and my parents were both still gone. I searched the garage for oil, eventually grabbing the container and heading back to my car. I popped the hood, the sick squelching loudly entering my ears. Oil. The mouth opened as wide as it could, a putrid rotting odor emanating out. Its eyes were crying black tears. I unscrewed the lid and, with trembling hands, began to pour. The thick yellow fluid began to flow into its mouth. I gagged as I watched the mouth guzzle it like a thirsty dog. It trickled out the sides of the mouth and coated the cracked teeth. I stopped pouring once the tears stopped flowing from its eyes. I shut the hood and carefully put the oil back in its place. This routine continued for the next week. All the while I never confronted my dad, fearful of his response. The engine would speak to me occasionally, making requests like turning the AC down or slowing down my speed. I obliged. One night I sat with my parents for dinner as they joked about memories from my childhood. My mom grabbed a photo album and started pointing out embarrassing kid pictures of me. My blood ran cold when I saw a familiar man in a photo holding me as a baby. Who's that? My fingers trembled under the table. That's your Uncle Tommy. He was your father's brother. My mom responded. My dad smiled, a half smile that seemed to hide some other emotion. He passed away when you were real little. Oh, I didn't know that. My fingers dug into my thigh. How did he die? Colon cancer. Sad thing. Same thing that got your grandfather. He frowned a bit and stood up from the table. I think I'll excuse myself. Those photos are great, hun. He squeezed my mom's hand and left the room without another word. Don't mind him. Of course, it's a touchy subject. She smiled at me and showed me more photos. I resolved that I needed to see what was inside my dad's car. I waited for the night to settle in and for my parents to sleep. I grabbed my flashlight and the keys from the front room. Outside, in the cold darkness, I quietly unlocked his car and pulled the lever, releasing a sick cracking noise as I did. I trained my flashlight on the hood and I steeled myself before lifting it with a swift motion. The rotting stench of burning flesh and oil hit me hard. The flashlight made the blood and mucus shine back at me. The Manajan hybrid groaned at me, gray hairs and wrinkled, greenish skin warped around its face. I knew this man. This was my grandfather. I recoiled and dropped the hood back down. "What are you doing?" The voice echoed from behind me, scruffy and demanding. I saw the shadow of my father against the hood of his car. I turned to face him, my spine like jelly. I shuddered. I couldn't think. "You know, I told you to never look there, right?" He grimaced. "Always the curious type. Just like Tommy." I tried to back up, but I ran into the car. "Someday it'll be me in there, you know. Someday your mother. And eventually, it'll be you." He began to step away from me. "I tried to warn you, son. Don't go telling anyone about this, or your time will come sooner than mine." He turned his back and walked back inside. My chest felt tight and I was left cold and confused. I went inside and laid in bed, unable to sleep. The image of my grandfather burned forever in my vision. I shouldn't have written this. I know what he said would happen if I did. But I can't keep this secret. The burden is too much. It's only a matter of time before I become one of them. And when it does, I need someone to know what they're driving. What's really under that hood.